Thank you, Dr. Sakata. I would like to start by, first and foremost, thanking God for being here and thanking the organizing committee under the chairmanship of Fabio for inviting me, to present this keynote presentation, and also for including halal and kosher in this Congress. I think it's very important, that now for 2 years in a row, halal and kosher has been given an opportunity to be presented as a keynote presentation compared to what has been happening in the past. And also for the effort they put to provide us with halal and kosher meat during the dinner. All these appreciations, goes to this organizing committee. What I will be talking about today, last year there was a review that I put that provides a good background for what I will be talking about today. For those of you who have seen, that publication, that's good. For those who have not, please, it's a mid-science publication on the top here that gives a lot of background information that I'm not going to be repeating today when I talk. And then, of course, with this new publication here, a lot of the information I'll be providing today is contained in this second article here that is already in mid-science. So when I mention the importance of including halal and kosher in this Congress, it's very clear. If you look at what is happening around the world, there's a large volume of meat and that is being traded, that is produced using halal and kosher methods. I just want to draw your attention to this table here. Yeah, this is just an example. If we look at some of the Middle Eastern countries, and then we compare with Israel, this is just an example of the total value of halal meat, that is produced and sold, around the world. And as you can see, compared to the total value of meat that is, exported or imported in various countries, the amount that is being imported in halal consuming countries, as well as among those who eat halal and kosher in the diaspora, there's a large number of people who live in the West, in the United States, that eat halal and kosher. Also, there are a lot of people who eat halal and kosher, not for religious reasons, because halal and kosher now is being strongly associated with quality. So for that reason, it is really very appropriate that we start looking at what are the impacts of these different production methods on the quality of meat that is produced using halal and kosher, methods. So before we talk about the impact of halal and kosher on quality, I think it is important that we try to understand what quality is. I'm not pretending to say that I'll stand here in front of you today and try to explain to you what quality means. Quality is a very difficult term to define. And when you attach it with meat, it even becomes more difficult, to define. Because our perception of what quality is affected by a lot of factors. A lot of factors. For instance, this perception can be affected by our regional and national differences. If you look at a lot of the publications that was published in a few years ago that looked at acceptance or what people consider qualitative throughout Europe, you find that someone in Greece will look at a product and he may not think that that product is good enough, while someone in France or someone in Italy may think that the product is good. So these regional effects, are there. But also at the same time, ethnicity. When I was growing up in Nigeria, I used to eat meat that's very tough. So when I first went to the United States for studies, I thought the meat was too tender, and it's actually not good enough. While maybe a lot of people who grew up in the United States are thinking tender meat is qualitative. In the beginning, I didn't see it was qualitative. But with time, when I became so used to, the meat there, when I visit Nigeria, I find the meat very tough. So there's a lot of these things, here that we have to, pay attention to. And of course, a lot of other reasons, including religion. And in this talk today, I'll be mentioning a little bit about religion because both kosher and halal production is strongly tied to, to faith. And therefore, I'll be sprinkling a little bit of those as we go along. So please bear with me in that regard. Now, although I've said that it's very difficult to define quality, when consumers are surveyed, there are a number of cues that they give as to what defines quality. And when we try to combine, those cues and try to define, quality or to categorize products on the basis of quality, there are a number of categorization or combinations that we come up with. And I have just a few of them here on the board here. If we look at it here, there are a lot of these qualities of meat can be categorized as whether they are extrinsic or intrinsic. I think Verbeke and a lot of other, European scientists have already published a lot of information on that. But when we talk about extrinsic or intrinsic, for instance, tenderness, marbling is an intrinsic quality of meat. While certain qualities like whether or not, this product has been, produced using good animal welfare practices, or whether or not this product at the end of the day is going to make you healthy is not something that you can see, immediately. And therefore, these could be considered, extrinsic. And if you look at the example of chilled versus frozen, if I ask a consumer what product between chilled and frozen, which one is more qualitative or which one is better, a lot of consumers will say chilled, never frozen, is better than frozen. Because we know that when we take vegetables and we freeze them, the vegetable will lose its own texture and structure, and it will ooze a lot of water, and it's not going to be sightly. So people think that it is the same thing with meat. But when you take meat and you treat it properly and you condition the meat and then you freeze it properly and you thaw it properly, when you put it in front of a consumer, it's very difficult for a consumer to pick the difference. But we already, if for a lot of, why are we, many countries including Uruguay, New Zealand, we are all trying to export our meat chilled because you get a premium when you export chilled product. You get twice the price for selling, chilled product compared, to frozen. Although in terms of quality, if you walk into a restaurant and you have not been given the opportunity to see the product, and that product is prepared properly and presented by a consumer, by the chef, it's very difficult for you to know that you are eating meat that has been previously frozen. So that's why when we look at quality, it's very difficult really, to talk, about quality. Still going on conventional quality, we can see, therefore, that when we talk about quality, it is the summation. It is the value you get from that product. Like we say, it is like beauty. We said that, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Therefore, quality too is actually can only be defined by the individual who consumes that product. I cannot say something is qualitative for you. You are the only one who will be able to determine that. And that's why we have to look at this aspect, of quality, and in terms of, what I'll be talking about next. That's spiritual quality. Before I say anything about spiritual quality, I really would like to, say that we have to look at this term very cautiously. I introduced this, term because I want to emphasize the fact that spirituality, culture, and ideology have strong impact on the way, products look at. And when we talk about halal and kosher particularly, this is where the issue of spiritual quality comes in and where it becomes very important. And later on, I will try to show why it's important that we understand this in terms of the debate, particularly the debate that is currently going on in Europe regarding certain practices that are involved in the production of halal and kosher. Now, when we talk about spiritual quality here, there are a number of considerations that we have to look at. The attitude towards killing of animals in general. There are people who tell you, we don't want an animal to be slaughtered at all because an animal is a living thing. It may have some religious connotation or just personal views. On the other hand, there are people who are happy to go and hunt animals, shoot them, and not for anything, just for a trophy. They are not even going to eat the meat. So, and in between there you find Islam and Judaism are in the middle, where we are told that we can slaughter an animal and eat the meat only if we are going to eat it for survival and for nutrition, not for frivolous reasons or just as a game. So that is where these two, major religions, will fit in. And also, who created the animal is an important issue. Who gives life and death? When should life be taken? What is the basis for taking life? These are some of the questions that we have to ask when we are talking about, spiritual issues. And therefore, for those who eat halal and kosher, spirituality is foundational. It's foundational because it is only on that foundation that anything else can be built. I just want to draw your attention to this figure here. And I deliberately put this figure like a block of building, where you have the structure here, and then you have the blocks on top of it. I'm just using, again, consumer, halal consumer, and I'm not talking in general about halal and kosher here, because what I'll be talking on later, there are certain practices that are allowed in halal, not allowed in kosher, that have impact on meat quality, and that's why I'm going to concentrate on that. Now, if I take a halal consumer, for instance, the first thing is the animal has to be halal. There is no way you can take pigs and you can do whatever you want to do to pigs, they will never become halal, the meat will not become halal. So the animal has to be a halal acceptable animal first. And look at the bottom here. The animal has to be legally owned. Although as a consumer I may not know whether somebody has rustled the cattle before it was slaughtered, if I knew that that animal has been rustled and stolen, that meat is not halal for me. So that's very important. And also, it has to be ethically farmed. I don't want to go through, because there's a lot of debate about what is ethical farming, for instance. If in the production of poultry, for instance, I have to take chick downs and then put them through a belt and grind them alive, is that ethical? Should that affect the way I should eat meat as a consumer? If I have the power not to be able to buy meat where this practice has to be done, then I will not eat that meat. Because I would rather those chick downs are left to grow and then processed. So this is, one of the issues. And also, if you look at it here, the animal has to be fed and watered prior to slaughter. So here we are saying for efficiency purpose, for food safety purpose, and earlier on this morning we were talking about how long should these animals be kept at the lairage before they are slaughtered. How long should they be kept before they are fed, before they are slaughtered? Islamically, the best practice is that the animal should be given food and water at libidum before it is slaughtered. Because even if you keep that animal hungry, whether it is ruminating or not, for 1 hour or 2 hours, it is affecting the welfare of that animal. Please don't mistake what I'm saying here in terms of what the religion says and sometimes what the practice is on the ground. I will make these differences later on. Now, so for that purpose, if you take meat, if you forget about this blue down here and you take meat that has all these qualities, the best piece of meat, the most expensive of meat, let's say it comes from Wagyu, cattle, produced the best way, it has the best color, but it is not produced properly, then for a halal consumer, that meat is worthless. Completely. That is why this spiritual quality is very important. And even in terms of spiritual quality, I am just being very careful here, because I would not want spiritual quality to become an issue that is going to become an industry requirement. Because within the spiritual quality itself, there are different grades. In halal, there's what we call halal and haram. Halal is acceptable, haram is completely unacceptable. But in the middle, there are two other categories, which allows an individual whether or not he can eat that product or not. But overruling all that is that as a Muslim, if I am starving to death, I'm allowed to even eat pigs. There's necessity. There's a factor called necessity. So that's why even within this spiritual issue, again, we have to be very careful the way we look at it. Now, before I talk about the impact of halal and kosher on meat quality, I would like to just say a few things about the difference between halal and kosher, just for those who are not familiar with it. And I know that this table is very busy, but I just would like to I can talk for 2 hours on this table alone. That's why I put it, in case I forget what I have to say, then I can spend all my time on this table. That's why I put this table. But if you look at it from the top, for both halal and kosher, the humane and deliberate treatment of animals before slaughter is very important. I know there's a big controversy running in Europe regarding halal, and kosher slaughter and animal welfare. I can tell you here, if you go to the sources of both these two religions in terms of Islam and Judaism, you will find that the treatment of animals have been mentioned in so many different places, and that animals have to be treated very, very carefully. The Prophet, our Prophet in Islam says that an animal should not be slaughtered in front of another animal. There is that question of emotion. Already it is recognized 1400 years ago that if you put an animal in front of another animal and slaughter it, the animal that hasn't been slaughtered, watching the other animal, will feel, the pain, will feel, what that other animal is going. And that's why it's not allowed in halal slaughter to keep animals, facing each other. So again, he said you have to use very sharp knife. Why did he say you have to use sharp knife? So that you can dispatch the animal as quickly as possible. So these are all some of the reasons. But if you go down through this table and you look at it from the top, one thing that's very important, a lot of issues and the debate that's going on in Europe now regarding that is that of stunning, for instance. While if you look at stunning here, stunning is not acceptable in kosher completely. At least the current methods of stunning that we have is not acceptable for kosher. That is both pre and post. But stunning is acceptable, certain form of stunning is acceptable in halal, and it is widely practiced. What is the two difference? I think this is one of the differences that we have to understand. In kosher, the animal has to be conscious and alive before it can be slaughtered, for it to be kosher. While in halal, the animal only needs to be alive. It doesn't have to be conscious. So the fact that in halal, an animal can be alive, but not necessarily conscious, enable in halal practices for stunning to be introduced. But it is not acceptable in kosher, completely, because the animal has to be conscious. I'm sure if we are able to come up with ways that we can keep that animal conscious and stunned, the kosher industry would be happy to adopt that practice. One other stuff is that you have to look at the bottom here. In terms of acceptability, kosher meat is acceptable for Muslims. If I travel around, yesterday I was asking someone when we went for our tour whether the meat is kosher, because I'm allowed to eat kosher. But very few, among the Sephardic Jews, very few group of them would accept halal. Otherwise, halal is not acceptable, for kosher. And who can slaughter an animal too is very important to know. For halal, a practicing Christian and a practicing Jew can slaughter animal and it's halal. But for kosher, the person has to be Jewish and he has to be a shohed before he can slaughter for it to be acceptable. Of course, there are a little bit of exceptions here and there, but these are just some few of the information that I think is important for us to know, to put out the background. So, if I take a piece of meat that is cooked, not cooked rather, but piece of meat that is from halal or kosher, and a piece of meat from conventionally produced practices, and I put it in front of you, and I ask you which is which. If it is the same cut, it is almost impossible. No one will be able to know just by looking at that product. So in essence, really, there is no difference between conventional method and halal and kosher method. But there are certain practices in order to harmonize the religious requirement as well as the welfare and conventional practices. There are certain practices that have been introduced, particularly in halal, like the use of head-only electrical stunning that may affect the quality of meat, and that is what we will be talking about here today. Now, I just want you to just look at, to emphasize that there's no difference. If you look at the flow chart here, starting from the animals at lairage down to the box ready for shipment, the only two areas where there may be difference between halal and kosher slaughter and the way conventional meat is produced is in this area here. The way the animal is restrained, and the way the animal, whether it's stunned or not, and then the way the animal is slaughtered, and the immediate post-slaughter practices. So this is very relevant, for us, to consider. Something with sheep. With poultry, I'm glad that there is a lot of, so I was in the beginning thinking, if I talk about poultry here, some people are going to take me and throw me out, but I'm glad that everyone is saying poultry should be introduced, and I'm glad that I've included it here. As you can see again, the flow chart, from transportation down to, some of the arms, here, some of the voltage and arms that are used for stunning. And all these pictures, I deliberately took them myself so that I would be able to talk about them without worrying about whether or not I'm infringing on someone's, property. So now, coming to the main point of the issue of impact of halal and kosher slaughter on meat quality, I think that can be divided. If we want to talk about that, it can be divided under 3 topics. One, the pre-slaughter practices. And we are really, fortunate that we have people like Dr. Temple Grandin and a lot of other people here have done a lot of work in trying to improve restraining methods and slaughter methods so that the halal and kosher slaughter can be done in a much, better way and in a much, animal, and welfare compliance in a way. So in terms of, quality, we'll talk about that, and then also the slaughter process itself and the immediate post-slaughter, and then some of the practices like kosherization, for instance, and then the combination of some of these 2 practices, pre- and post-slaughter practices, and how that impacts, on meat quality. Now, I'm using this, picture here just to show as an example of restraint. For many of you here, I'm not claiming to be an expert on poultry. I know Dr. Huang and others are here, who work on poultry, and many of you here probably, and there's Dr. Poulen now is doing more work in that area. If you look at the 2 figures here, the 2 images on the top and the bottom, the main difference between these images is that here, these birds are slaughtered using mechanical methods, and the bottom here, hand methods. In mechanical methods, what we face in terms of halal, requirement is that when we go to the industry and we tell them that for you to meet the requirement of halal and maybe even for kosher, using mechanical methods can be adapted, but stunning, sometimes is an issue, but also the speed and the throughput. If you look at the top here, the way the animals are packed, the rate of the throughput in this plant here that I took these pictures from is about 120 to 150 birds per minute. And these birds are shackled and they are coming, they are compacted together, and then when they come, you see this tire here is supposed to present, those birds and place them properly for the mechanical knife, to cut, that. So that is done very well. But in that process, because of the speed and the way the animals are compacted, you can see this picture here, I took a number of them. I just put one here. Within the same line, this bird here, before it's even slaughtered, the wing has been broken. So a lot of these issues can happen that can impact on the carcass quality overall before we even go into the muzzle itself. While if you compare that to the bottom here, this is using halal slaughter. Of course, this is both halal. I'm just trying to show you. This is done in halal way. But this is done in halal way, except here, the speed is 70 to 90 birds per minute, and the slaughter is used hand slaughter. If you go into that plant and you try to look at the quality of the product that is produced, you will find that very little amount of rejects are here. Although both these 2 plants use stunning, and they use water immersion, stunning. Yet, the problem that this plant will have is less than the problem that this plant will have. So, if I am talking about animal welfare, I know when I talk to these guys and I tell them, why don't you reduce the speed? Why don't you also reduce the throughput? They say, if we reduce the throughput, our competitors will, beat us out of the market. This is a very valid, argument. So, the consumer himself who is demanding, animal rights has to be able to put his hand in his pocket and pay more for these people to be able to slow it down. While those of us who are scientists are looking for alternative ways, we think everyone in the chain has to be involved. Otherwise, to be able to produce products sustainably and animal welfare compliant is continuing to evade us. Now, coming down to the second effect here. I'm just trying to show here, for those of you who are familiar, in terms of stunning, in halal you can stun using head only electrical stunning. And I'm just showing this here before I go into this. This here, the animal is presented. As you can see here, this is head-only electrical stunning. I'm talking about where the current is passed only through the head. And here you can see that the animal is presented, but before the stunning. And important thing is to know there are electrodes here, and then there's electrode here. So when this is lifted and then it touches the nose of the animal, the current goes through the head, and then the animal is stunned. This is the animal here. Now you can see water is being sprayed here so as to increase contact to make sure that the stunning is done properly. And then this is the back of the animal here. Now, with this practice of head-only electrical stunning, one of the major issues in terms of meat quality, which has been treated, I think, from the time Icomst started, and I think from, particularly in early 80s, and late 70s and early 80s, the issue of hemorrhages, blood splash. This is, actually one of the most major problems, in short, with stunning, particularly head-only electrical stunning, is this problem here. All right? So now there are two types of blood or hemorrhages that we get. We have blood splash and speckles. Blood splash is what you find in the muzzle. Yesterday, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, someone put some images from Denmark that has some few blood splash. And then speckles is what you find within the fat and the connective tissue. Now, in terms of ecchymosis, as we have said, what is causing it? There are a lot of theories that have been done. A lot of work has been done in New Zealand on lambs to explain, ecchymosis, for instance. But one thing that has been proposed is that blood splash is caused due to rise in blood pressure and the supercontracture. We know when you take a living animal, a living muzzle, and then you stimulate it, the muzzle will contract. So when you stimulate these animals also, the muscles, will contract, and therefore there is rupture in terms of, in some of the blood vessels, and that causes, ecchymosis. And they come in different sizes. It can be small, size, like pin, sizes, and it can be also, very large. Where some of them are so small, you have to look very closely before you can see it, and then others, are big enough that you can see it from a distance. Does this, constitute problems in terms of health? No. Does it constitute? But it is unaesthetic. Looking at it, it doesn't look good, and that's why, it constitutes, meat quality problem. And also, look at the example here that I'm giving here. If you look at this one here, you can see it's just small here. You can see this, you can see it, but it's small. Compare that to this on the surface here, or these two. And these are from different muscles. This is a loin muscle here. I think this is from a chuck, muscle. And then, these two muscles here. So this is one way you can see, ecchymosis or, blood splash. And this is a major quality problem associated with, that is one major quality problem associated with the use of head-only stunning in terms of, halal slaughter. And something here. You look at poultry here. You find a fine-looking, poultry breast with this problem here. Completely discounted. No one will put this, on the shelf for any consumer to buy. Something here. Here. Engorged, wings, red-tipped wings, legs. And these are just by just being there, and you are there, and you can just, as the bus are passing through, you can pick, these issues, coming through. And if you want to, save your time, you just walk over to where they put all their rejects, and you can find tons of, those that are rejected. If you go to places where stunning is not involved, where slaughter is done, properly, you will hardly find these issues particularly. I'm not, saying here that, now, in terms of this blood splash, this is the order. No stunning, less than percussive stunning. Percussive stunning is when you use mushroom stunning, where you just, the animal is, stunned. And captive bolt, less than head-to-back electrical, and less than head-only. So head-only electrical is the worst, method of stunning in terms of constituting, blood splash. Incidence increase with duration and current. Incidence is reduced with shorter stun to stick time. And incidence severity is reduced with thoracic sticking. What is thoracic sticking? I apologize for those who are squeamish about all these pictures that I'm putting. But this fine animal here, this actually, by the way, this is Wagyu raised on grass. New Zealand Wagyu raised on grass. Slaughtered halal. What a combination, Japanese, genetic traits, New Zealand, and then, so all these combinations there. But what this slaughterman is doing now is, after the animal is slaughtered, and the blood, flows out, because for cattle, as opposed to other, species like lamb, there's a secondary source of blood that can supply up to 20% of blood to the brain of the animal. So when you slaughter halal and kosher way, and you just slaughter the four, vessels that take blood to the brain and brings the blood back, from the brain, if you sever this, that other source is still there. So it can take cattle long time before it dies. And for that reason, thoracic stick is used so that the slaughterman will put a knife right there at the brachiocephalic, trunk, just where the arteries start, to branch from the heart, and then cut it off so that the blood will ooze out and then prevent that blood from going to the brain. So this practice is set up, This practice does help in reducing ichthyosis. Now, all these, here are just the different type of, problems that are associated, with blood splash and stunning. If you don't stun, you have less, of the issues compared to, let's say, if you look at birds here, all these problems, red wing tips, shoulder, strawberry, and breast muscles, hemorrhages, blood splash, engorged smearing of wing and pectoral veins, red feather tract, broken bones, all these are associated, with stunning. And this all affect the meat quality and the carcass quality, and therefore, in terms of profitability for the processor. Same thing here. I'm just putting all this here. This presentation will be available, and then you can look at the details of these different, issues that are raised. Now, this is where I want to spend at least 2 minutes to talk about this issue because of the importance of this issue. And I deliberately chose what the organizing committees use as a motto: nature and innovation with due respect, in order to discuss pre-slaughter stunning and meat quality. There's a big debate. For those of you who come from Europe and those who pay attention to this issue, there's a big debate going on between whether stunning should be done or not, whether stunning without, halal slaughter or kosher slaughter without stunning should be allowed in Europe. And it is very emotional. And it is now becoming the issue of human rights versus animal rights. And the scientists are not helping the situation. The religious communities are not also helping the situation whatsoever. And I think they are now locked in a dogmatic, a debate that if it continues that way, there's not going to be an end to it at all. That's why I think I want to pause a moment here and present to you, who are scientists, who are working in this area, the importance of how we should approach, these issues. Because, as this statement says here, both religion and science has a lot to lose if religion and science doesn't sit together and discuss how things can be improved for the humanity, for the animal, and for everyone, who is involved, in the process. There are people who simply, Muslims and Jews, who, no matter what you produce in terms of development, they will not accept it. It has to be done the way it has been done 1400 years ago. So, how do you approach these individuals? How do we approach these individuals? And there are many of them. And I think in Europe, that's where the problem is. We have been able to get halal, head-only stunning that is compliant, that harmonizes the religious requirement as well as the welfare requirement, and we are able to do it. And that meat is being sold. There's no problem. But I think the approach in Europe is wrong, the way the scientists and the animal welfare people approach the religious authorities, and that's where a lot of problem, is coming. Now, I just want you to pause and look at this, quickly. The opponents and the proponents of stunning. Those who oppose stunning are saying, although they believe that animal welfare is important, but the way they are told how to handle it, for instance, these individuals are saying scientists are treating them arrogantly. They are telling them that they know everything, that because they are religious people, they don't know anything. And therefore, what they are saying is, and it's a question of belief. It's really a question of belief. I, as a Muslim, believe that if I treat an animal and I present an animal nicely, and I mention, the name of God, I have faith that this animal, when I slaughter it, it will not feel the pain. How can you prove that I'm wrong? You can put any gadget you want, you can show any graph you want. I'm not going to be convinced that what I believe is not, true. That is, the simple question, And at the same time, what they are saying is, science should not use its own method to try to explain what is, based on faith. On the other hand, if you look at this side here, I know myself as a Muslim, I go to, slaughter plants, and I see the slaughter boys. When you compare the training that the kosher slaughterer get compared to halal slaughterer, the kosher slaughterer spent 2 years training on how to sharpen the knife and how to slaughter an animal. They are not comparable. So if a showhead does his job properly with his training, then that animal can be dispatched easily without any issues. But a lot of the boys are not trained, and they don't have compassion for the animals. And it's true, although the religion tells them that the animal is alive, is conscious, it can have feeling, these guys, when they enter into that place, they forget about everything. They are just repeating the words only and then slaughtering the animal, kicking the animals without any due respect. And I think that's where the problem is. If these two can sit down and look at issues carefully, the industrial way of producing meat can be improved. And those issues and the raging debate that we are going through will not continue. This is just an example of immobilization. So when you immobilize, one of the practices that creates problem with meat quality is when you head only stand, you are putting electrical inputs. And when you immobilize, like this at the immobilization belt here, this animal is immobilized, you can see it stretched and a lot of electricity going through it. The combination of these electrical inputs will lead to rapid rago attainment, and then with the rapid rago attainment, you are going to have issues with color, you will have issues with drip loss, you will have issues with tenderness, potential, and a lot of other issues that are negative, for meat quality. I've already gone through this. So what are some of the stuff that is happening now that will improve, that? There's a lot of development. And I think as scientists, we need to continue to look at ways that we can improve on how an animal can be, stand. People like Temple Grandin and others have done a lot of work on restraint. And now that has improved a lot of meat quality. Something we need to be able to come up with better ways and talk to these religious authorities so that we'll be able to work together with them. And some of the work that is going on include the use of reversible head only, but using high frequency. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. High frequency compared to normal frequency. Normal frequency is the same stuff that you get from your outlets, from your home outlets. If that current goes through the heart, it will stop the heart, and therefore it's not acceptable for halal or any kosher. But with high frequency, if you change the waveform now to a square waveform from sinusoidal waveform, and you increase the frequency to 1,000 to 2,000, that frequency will be very shallow, and you will be able to put it through a tissue and the heart will still pump, and the animal will still be alive. So, and the animal will be still. So it's more welfare compliant in terms of compared to others. And then there are also all these other methods that have not been proven, including the use of modified atmosphere, studying of animals. Now, this is some of the work that we are doing now in terms of, in New Zealand in order to improve animal welfare and at the same time harmonize, religious requirements. And this involves the use of minimal anesthesia, putting the animal down, the animal is alive and conscious, and we are able to measure, all the brain waves and all other measurements, and we can allow the animal to recover without affecting its own welfare as much, so that we can see exactly what effect those electrical inputs have on this animal. Again, when you can look at this and we can discuss, at length. And these are the conclusions. There's nothing new that I can say in the conclusion except that it's the same thing that I've already said, and I thank you for your attention.